Hello Bookworms, welcome back to the Bonified Bookworm. I'm your host Rachel, and if you're here, you are here to read along with me and improve your English. I do not have a book to review today, but I will have one next time I post. Today we are just going to jump into Touching the Void by Joe Simpson. When we left off, Joe was kind of dangling, I think, from the mountain, and he's just kind of suspended in air, and Simon is up above Joe, so he doesn't know what's going on down below. So we'll see what happens. We are picking up at the top of page 97. Let's see, I'm actually just going to back up to page 96 to finish a sentence in this paragraph, and we'll continue on. All right, so he's wrenched off his mittens. I slipped one over my wrist and held the second in my teeth. In reaching for the loops, I had let go of the rope and tumbled over backwards so that I hung from the waist. My rucksack had pulled me over, and I hung in an inverted curve with my head and legs lower than my waist. I struggled to swing up until I reached the rope and pulled myself back to a sitting position. I crooked my left arm around the rope to hold me upright and took the loop from my teeth with my right hand. I tried to twist the thin loop of cord around the rope, but my fingers were too numb. I needed to get a prusik knot onto the rope so that I could slide the knot up and hang in tension as the knot tightened. The effort of holding myself up was exhausting. At last, using a combination of teeth and hand, I managed to twist the loop around the rope and then tried repeating the process. I needed at least 3 twists before the knot would be of any use. By the time I had succeeded, I was almost crying with frustration. It had taken me nearly 15 minutes. The wind nudged me into a gentle spin and blasted the incessant avalanches into my face, blinding me. I clipped a carabiner into the prusik loop and fastened it to my waist. I shoved the loop as far up the rope as I could reach and leant back on it. The knot tightened, slipped a few inches, and then held me. I let go of the rope and hung back. I remained sitting up. The second loop had to be tied onto the rope, but this time I would be able to use both hands. It wasn't until I tried to slip it off my left wrist that I realized how useless my hands were. Both were frozen. I could move the fingers of my right hand, but my left hand, which had been still as I held onto the rope, had seized. I thumped them together, bending the fingers in against my palms. I hit them, bent them, hit them again and again, but there was no hot aches. Some movement and feeling returned, but it was minimal. I took the loop from my wrist and held it against the rope. At my first attempt to twist it around and back inside itself, I dropped it. It fell onto the main rope knot on my harness, and I grabbed at it before it was blown off. Then, as I lifted it to the rope, it seemed to slide out of my hand. I grabbed at it with my left hand and managed to catch it against my right forearm. I couldn't pick it up. My fingers refused to close round it, and as I tried slipping it up my arm, it dropped again. This time, I watched it fall away beneath me. I knew at once that I now had no chance of climbing up the rope. It would have been hard enough doing it with 2 loops, and now, with both hands so useless, I had no chance. I slumped onto the rope and swore bitterly. At least I wasn't having to hold myself up. It was a consolation, although I knew it achieved little else. The rope ran up from my waist, taut as an iron bar. The loop I had attached gripped the rope 3 feet above my harness. I unclipped it from my harness and then threaded it through my rucksack straps so that it pulled them together across my chest. I fastened it with my last carabiner and leant back to test it. The effect was good. The loop now held my torso up on the rope so that I sat in space as if in an armchair. When I was sure it was as good as I could get it, I slumped back onto the rope, feeling utterly weary. The wind gusted against me, making me swing crazily on the rope, and with each gust I was getting colder. The pressure of the harness on my waist and thighs had cut off the circulation, and both legs felt numb. The pain in the knee had gone. I let my arms hang slackly, feeling the dead weight of useless hands in my midst. There was no point in reviving them. There was no way out of this slow hanging. I couldn't go up, and Simon would never get me down. I tried to work out how long it had been since I had gone over the edge. I decided it could be no more than half an hour. In 2 hours, I would be dead. I could feel the cold taking me. Twinges of fear lurked round my mind, but even these were fading as it crept through me. I was interested in the sensations, wondering idly how it would take me. At least it wouldn't hurt. I was glad of that. The hurting had worn me out, and it felt so calm now that it was over. Above my waist, the cold slowed its progress. I fancied how it would ease its way up, following veins and arteries, creeping inexorably through me. I thought of it as something living, something which lived through crawling into my body. Something which lived through crawling, yeah, that's what it says. I knew it didn't work like that, but it felt as if it did, and that seemed a good enough reason to believe it. I wasn't going to argue about it with anyone, of that I could be sure. I almost laughed out loud at the idea. I felt so tired, sleepy tired, and weak. I had never felt so weak, so limbless, disembodied feeling. It was odd. I jerked down sharply and bounced on the rope. When I turned to look at the wall, I realized I was going down. Simon was lowering me again. I shook my head, trying to clear the lethargy. Lethargy? He had no chance. I was sure that he was gambling on me being able to... I was sure he was gambling on being able to get me down before the knot jammed. Secretly, I hoped he could, and knew with certainty that he had no chance. I screamed a warning into the night. There was no reply. I continued falling steadily. I looked down and saw the crevice below me. I could see it clearly. When I looked up, I could no longer make out the top of the cliff. The ropes ran up into snow flurries and disappeared. There was a small jerk, then another, and I stopped. Half an hour passed. I stopped shouting at Simon. I knew he was in the same situation as me, unable to move. Either he would die in his seat, or be pulled from it by the constant strain of my body. I wondered whether I would die before this happened. It would happen as soon as he lost consciousness, and maybe he would do so before me. On the rope, I was clear of the worst avalanches. He would be colder than me. Each thought of death, of mine or his, came quite unemotionally, matter of fact. I was too tired to care. Perhaps if I was scared, I would fight harder, I thought, and then dismiss the idea. I was scared tying the loops, and it hadn't helped. Tony Kurtz had fought and fought when he was dying on the Eiger. He had never once stopped fighting, and he had dropped suddenly dead on the rope, still fighting to live. Rescuers had watched him die. It seemed strange to be in the same situation and not be bothered. Maybe it's the cold. Won't be long now. I'll not last till morning. Won't see the sun either. I hope Simon doesn't die. That's hard. He shouldn't have to die for me. I jerked upright. The drifting, aimless thoughts pushed away and replaced with a consuming anger at what had happened. I screamed at the wind, swearing and yelling blind. On the last bloody lower, and after all that pain, you shit, you fucking bastard. Words wasted into the snow and wind, shouted to no one in particular in a shaking fury of bitterness and grievance. Idiot words, as meaningless as the hissing, empty wind around me. Anger surged through me. It warmed me, shook me, driving the cold off in a tirade of obscenities and frustrated tears. I cried for myself and swore at myself. Everything came down to me. It was my knee that was smashed. I had fallen and I was dying, and Simon with me. The rope slipped. I bounced down a few inches, then again. Had he freed the knot? I slipped again, stopped. Then I knew what was about to happen. He was coming down. I was pulling him off. I hung still and waited for it to happen. Any minute. Any minute. Joe had smiled as we've switched to italics, so I'm assuming now we're reading again from Simon's point of view. Joe had smiled as I let him slide away from me. It wasn't much of a smile. His pain twisted into a grimace. I let him go fast and ignored his cries. He was quickly gone from my torch beam, and as another avalanche swept over my head, the rope disappeared as well. Apart from his weight on my waist, there was no sign of his existence. I kept the speed going. The belay plate was easy to control despite my deadened fingers. They were bad now. I worried about them as I had done since we left the coal. I knew Joe's climbing days were over, but now I was scared for my hands. There was no telling how bad they would be. I had a quick look when it was light, but I couldn't see how deep the damage was. 4 fingertips were blackened and 1 thumb, but there was no saying whether the others wouldn't also go the same way. I heard a faint cry from below, and the rope jerked slightly. Poor bastard, I thought. I had hurt him all the way down. It was strange being so cold about it. It had been hard not to feel for him. It was easier now. We had made such fast progress. Efficient. I felt proud about it. We had held it all together, and that was good. The lowering had been easier than I had expected, especially with Joe digging the seats for me. He had really held it together. That was some control. I'd never asked him to dig the seats, but he had just went ahead and did it. Wonder whether I would have done that. Who knows? My hands were stiffening again. They always got bad before the knot, stiff like claws. The rope ran out smoothly. I'd been careful to avoid any tangles. The idea of holding Joe with one hand and trying to unsnarl a tangled and frozen rope didn't bear thinking about. The pull at my harness increased. The slope must be steepening again. The slope must be steepening again, I thought. There were another 70 feet to go before the halfway knot had to be changed over. I increased the rate of descent. I knew it was hurting him. When it had been light, I could see his pain for a long way down, but we had got down. It was necessary. Another faint cry came from the darkness. A rushing flow of snow poured over me again. I hunched deeper into the seat, feeling the snow settle and crumble slightly. The seats lasted for the lower, but by then they were well on their way to collapse. Suddenly I jolted heavily forward from the waist and nearly came out of the seat. I threw my weight back and down into the snow, bracing my legs hard against the sudden pressure. Christ! Joe's falling. I let the rope slide slowly to a stop, trying to avoid the impact I would have got if I had stopped it dead. The pressure remained constant. My harness bit into my hips, and the rope pulling tautly above my legs threatened to rip me down through the floor of the seat. After half an hour, I let the rope slide again. Whatever Joe had gone over had stopped him getting his weight off the rope. My legs had numbed as the pressure on my hips cut the blood supply away. I tried to think of something to do other than lower. There was nothing. Joe had not attempted to climb back up. I had felt no trembling in the rope to tell me he was attempting something. There was no chance of hauling him up. Already the seat was half of its original size. It had steadily disintegrated from beneath my thighs. I couldn't hold the weight much longer. The steep sections higher on the face had been less than 50 feet high. I decided that he would be able to get his weight off the rope after a short distance and set a belay up. I had no choice. As the rope ran out, I realized that the pressure wasn't easing. Joe was still hanging free. What in hell's name was I lowering him over? I looked down at the slack rope being fed through the belay plate. 20 feet below, I spotted the knot coming steadily towards me. I began swearing, trying to urge Joe to touch down onto something solid. At 10 feet, I stopped lowering. The pressure on the rope hadn't changed. I kept stamping my feet. I was trying to halt the collapse of the seat, but it wasn't working. I felt the first shivers of fear. Snow hit me again from behind, surging over and around me. My thighs moved down frantically. The avalanche pushed me forward and filled the seat behind my back. Oh God, I'm going to come off. Then it stopped, as abruptly as it had started. I let the rope slide 5 feet, thinking furiously. Could I hold the rope with one hand below the knot and change the plate over? I lifted one hand from the rope and stared at it. I couldn't squeeze it into a fist. I thought of holding the rope locked against the plate by winding it around my thigh and then releasing the plate from my harness. Stupid idea. I couldn't hold Joe's weight with my hands alone. If I released the plate 150 feet, a free rope would run unstoppable through my hands, and then it would rip me clear off the mountain. It had been nearly an hour since Joe had gone over the drop. I was shaking with cold. My grip on the rope kept easing despite my efforts. The rope slowly edged down, and the knot pressed against my right fist. I can't hold it, can't stop it. The thought overwhelmed me. The snowslides and wind and cold were forgotten. I was being pulled off. The seat moved beneath me, and snow slipped away past my feet. I slipped a few inches. Stamping my feet deep into the slope halted the movement. God, I had to do something. The knife, I thought, came out of nowhere. Of course, the knife. Be quick, come on, get it. The knife was in my sack. It took an age to let go a hand and slip the strap off my shoulder, and then repeat it with the other hand. I braced the rope across my thigh and held onto the plate with my right hand as hard as I could. Fumbling at the catches on the rucksack, I could feel the snow slowly giving way beneath me. Panic threatened to swamp me. I felt in the rucksack, searching desperately for the knife. My hand closed around something smooth and I pulled it out. The red plastic handle slipped in my mitt and I nearly dropped it. I put it in my lap before tugging my mitt off with my teeth. I had already made the decision. There was no other option left to me. The metal blade stuck to my lips when I opened it with my teeth. I reached down to the rope and then stopped. The slack rope. Clear the loose rope twisted round my foot. If it tangled, it would rip me down with it. I carefully cleared it to one side and checked that it all lay in the seat away from the belay plate. I reached down again, and this time I touched the blade to the rope. It needed no pressure. The taut rope exploded at the touch of the blade, and I flew backwards into the seat as the pulling strain vanished. I was shaking. Leaning back against the snow, I listened to a furious hammering in my temple as I tried to calm my breathing. Snow hissed over me in a torrent. I ignored it as it poured over my face and chest, spurting into the open zip at my neck and on down below. It kept coming, washing across me and down after the cut rope and after Joe. I was alive, and for the moment that was all I could think about. Where Joe was or whether he was alive didn't concern me in the long silence after the cutting. His weight had gone from me. There was only the wind and the avalanches left to me. When at last I sat up, the slack rope fell from my hips. One frayed end protruded from the belay plate. He had gone. Had I killed him? I didn't answer the thought, though some urging in the back of my mind told me I had. I felt numb. Freezing cold and shocked into the numb silence, I stared bleakly into the swirling snow beneath me, wondering at what had happened. There was no guilt, not even sorrow. I stared at the faint torch beam cutting through the snow and felt haunted by its emptiness. I was tempted to shout to him, but stifled the cry. It wouldn't be heard. I could be sure of that. I shivered in the wind as the cold crept up my back. Another avalanche swept over me in the darkness. Alone on a storm-swept avalanching mountain face and becoming dangerously cold, I was left with no choice but to forget about Joe until the morning. I stood up and turned into the slope. The belay seat was full of avalanche powder. I started to dig, and soon I had excavated a sufficiently large hole to lie half buried in the slope, with only my legs exposed to the storm. I dug automatically, while my mind wandered through tortured arguments and asked unanswerable questions. And then I stopped digging and lay still, thinking about the night. Then I dug again. Every few minutes I would shake myself from a mess of thoughts and return to digging, only to find I had drifted off again a few minutes later. It took a long time to complete the cave. It was a weird night. It felt strange to think so coldly about what had happened, as if I were distancing myself from the events. Occasionally, I wondered whether Joe was still alive. I had no idea what he had fallen over. I knew how close we had come to the bottom of the mountain, so it seemed reasonable to hope that he might survive a short fall to the glacier, could even now be digging a snow cave for himself. Something made me think this wasn't the case, and I couldn't evade the urgent feeling that he must be dead or dying. I sensed that something awful was hidden in the powder avalanches, swirling madly through the black night below my snow cave. When the cave was finished, I struggled into my sleeping bag and blocked the entrance with my rucksack. The wind and the avalanches rushing across the roof could not be heard, and I lay in the silent darkness trying to sleep, plagued with endless thoughts which turned madly upon themselves in vicious circles. Sleep was impossible. I tried to get my mind to settle by looking back on what I had done and thinking it all through. After a while I stopped, having succeeded only in recalling the facts, and they were so starkly real that I could draw no conclusions from them. I wanted to question what I had done. It seemed necessary to prosecute myself and to prove that I had been wrong. The result was worse than the vicious circles which had made me think it through. I argued that I was satisfied with myself. I was actually pleased that I had been strong enough to cut the rope. There had been nothing else left to me, and so I had gone ahead with it. I had done it, and done it well. Shit, that takes some doing. A lot of people would have died before getting it together to do that. I was still alive because I had held everything together right up to that last moment. It had been executed calmly. I had even carefully stopped to check that the rope wasn't going to tangle and pull me down. So that's why I feel so damn confused. I should feel guilty. I don't. I did right. But what of Joe? Eventually I dozed and spent a few troubled hours lost in sleep between waking hours of thinking blind in a dark, storm-swept cave, thinking because my mind refused to sleep, or because I was so pumped up on strain and fear and dread, thinking, Joe's dead, I know he's dead, in a monotonous litany, and then not thinking of him as Joe anymore, only the weight gone off from my waist so suddenly and violently that I couldn't fully grasp it at all. As the night lengthened, I sank into a dazed confusion, and Joe faded from memory. It was thirst that took his place, and with it, each awakening, I craved water until it governed my every thought. My tongue felt dry and swollen. It stuck to my palate, and no amount of snow crammed into my mouth could kill the thirst. It was nearly 24 hours since I had taken a drink. In that time, I should have had at least 1.5 liters of fluid to make up for the dehydration caused by the altitude. I smelt the water and the snow around me, and it maddened me. I dozed into exhausted stupors, only to wake abruptly to an insistent craving for liquid. It gradually lightened. I saw axe marks on the roof, and the night was over. With the coming of day, I thought of what I must do. I knew I wouldn't succeed. It wasn't right for me to succeed. I had thought it all through. This is what must happen to me now. I was no longer afraid, and the dread in the night had gone with the dawn. I knew I would attempt it, and I knew it would kill me, but I was going to go through with it. There would be some dignity left to me at least. I had to try my best. It wouldn't be enough, but I would try. I dressed like a priest before Mass, with solemn, careful ceremony. I felt in no hurry to start down, and was certain that it would be my last day. Filled with a sense of condemnation, I prayed for the day in such a way that it felt as if I were part of an ancient, universal ritual, a long-planned ritual which had been born during the dark, thought-racked hours behind me. I fastened the last strap of my crampons onto my boot, and then stared silently at my gloved hands. The careful preparation had calmed me. My fear had gone, and I was quiet. I felt cold and hard. The night had cleaned me out, purging the guilt and the pain. The loneliness since the cutting had also gone. The thirst had eased. I was as ready as I would ever be. I smashed the roof of the cave with my axe and stood up into the blinding glare of a perfect day. No avalanches and no wind. Silent ice mountains gleamed white around me, and the glacier curved gently westwards to the black moraines above base camp. I felt watched. Something in the crescent of summits and ridges looked down on me and waited. I stepped from the wreckage of the cave and started to climb down. I was about to die. I knew it, and they knew it. And that is where we're going to stop on we'll go to page 107, chapter 7. that was insane. I don't know if I would have the thought to cut my friend off. Yeah, that's another reason why I don't go doing this ice climbing stuff. They're crazy. That's a crazy decision that I would not want to have to make, yourself or your friend. So yeah, we'll come back to it and we'll see if Joe's still alive. I don't know. I still don't have a catchy phrase to end my YouTube channel on. I did think about, like, y'all come back now, you hear? But I think that's from Hee Haw, so I think that might be like copy infringement or something. I don't know. But anyway, if you think of a good sign off, let me know. This is, again, Rachel with the Bonified Bookworm. Hope y'all have a great day and tune back in for the next chapter. Bye.